Cruz versus Secretary of Environment and Natural Resources. In this case, petitioners challenged IPRA's constitutionality, alleging violations of the Regalian Doctrine, private property rights, and due process. SC dismissed the petition in a tie vote, upholding IPRA's validity and indigenous rights facts. Parties involved petitioners Isagani Cruz and Cesar Europa filed a suit against the Secretary of Environment and Natural Resources, Secretary of Budget and Management, and the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples (NCP). Various indigenous groups and organizations intervened in the case. Subject matter: the petitioners challenged the constitutionality of certain provisions of Republic Act No. 8371, also known as the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act of 1997 IPRA, and its implementing rules and regulations. Petitioners claims they argue that IPRA violates the Regalian Doctrine under Section 2, Article 12 of the Constitution, which vests ownership of natural resources in the state. They also contended that IPRA infringes on private property rights and due process. Provisions challenge the petitioners specifically question Sections 3A, 3B, 5, 6, 7, 8, 52I, 57, 58, 59, 63, 65, and 66 of IPRA, as well as Rule 7, Part 2, Section 1 of NCIP Administrative Order No. 1. Relief sought petitioners sought a declaration of unconstitutionality, writs of prohibition to stop the implementation of IPRA, and a writ of mandamus to compel the DENR Secretary to fulfill constitutional duties. Issue: constitutionality of IPRA, whether the provisions of IPRA, particularly those granting ownership and control of ancestral domains and natural resources to indigenous peoples, violate the Regalian Doctrine and other constitutional provisions. Private property rights, whether the inclusion of private lands within ancestral domains under IPRA violates the rights of private landowners. Due process and equal protection, whether the powers and jurisdiction granted to the NCIP under IPRA violate due process and equal protection clauses. Presidential control, whether the lateral but autonomous relationship between the NCIP and the Office of the President infringes on the President's constitutional power of control over executive departments. The ruling. The Supreme Court, in a per curiam resolution, dismissed the petition. The court was divided, with 7 justices voting to dismiss the petition and uphold the constitutionality of IPRA, and 7 justices voting to grant the petition and declare certain provisions unconstitutional. The tie resulted in the dismissal of the petition, effectively upholding IPRA ratio. Regalian Doctrine and IPRA. The court held that IPRA does not violate the Regalian Doctrine. The law recognizes the rights of indigenous peoples to their ancestral domains and lands, which are considered private but community property. This recognition is consistent with the Constitution's mandate to protect the rights of indigenous cultural communities. Private property rights. The court found no violation of private property rights, as IPRA provides mechanisms to resolve conflicts between indigenous peoples and private landowners, due process and equal protection. The court ruled that the NCIP's powers and jurisdiction do not violate due process or equal protection. The application of customary laws in resolving disputes involving indigenous peoples is consistent with the Constitution. Presidential control. The court held that the lateral but autonomous relationship between the NCIP and the Office of the President does not infringe on the President's constitutional power of control. The NCIP's autonomy is limited to policy and program coordination.